Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Have a great day.
My name's Bob. I'm an alcoholic. I'm from Richmond, Indiana. My date of sobriety is August 15th, 1975, when I walked into a meeting, and I'd been invited to go to that meeting before. It was out in Santa Monica, California, and Dennis T. had tried to get me to go a couple of times before, but this time I said yes. I was walking in circles in my apartment, kind of mumbling to myself, and the refrigerator was singing to me. And I don't know if you guys had that happen to them or not. But somebody said alcohol is the only liquid that sings. And I was hallucinating. I was drunk at my first meeting and have not had to have a drink of alcohol since because of God. Not because of me, certainly. I've tried to quit all my life since I was a teenager. I tried to quit drinking forever. I went to jail a lot of times. I always went to, just weekends generally, but I'll quit forever, but it didn't work. And that AA really worked for me, and I thank God for that. So that's my qualification for being here. I have several things to say before we get started. Before we start, I'd like everybody in the room to have one of these and one of these. I asked Brian to get us a hander-out person. He said he'd assign somebody to do that. So if you do that, please, and appreciate that. And thank you. Take more than one if you like one, or you have a friend that wants one. There's a lot of extras there. And one is kind of like the history of AA's on the back, a very brief history, and then there's how things went together, kind of shows on that. On one side of this, you will see, once you get it in your hand, the side that has the numbers is the pre-AA history. This is what happened before AA started. And the other side is after AA started. So you've got two sides there to it. There's a lot of information on that, written very briefly and sparsely for you. The second announcement I have is this. I became an archives person 25 years ago, a long time ago. I've been very interested in the history of AA. Some of us get into history of AA. We try to encourage other people to be interested in how AA started and so on like that. And because we think in our history lies our hope. And our hope is really right in our history. If they all got drunk back in those days, we wouldn't be here today. If they wouldn't have had a program of action, if we want to know what it is, we wouldn't be here today. And not only are those people back there, AA history and archives, you people are also AA history. You need to be here for the people who are not even born yet, who will be here 20, 30 years from now. And so it isn't just about back then, it's also about now, the history turns out to be. And one thing is done, some people do all kinds of things. They make recordings and also write books. I'll talk about recordings first. This stuff is all free, by the way. I don't sell anything for money. This is called Dawn of Hope. It's put out by Dr. Bob House. And so somebody who would like to have this to play at their meeting, it's 30 minutes long. So when you have an AA meeting, you can play it for 30 minutes and discuss it for 30 minutes. Get everybody interested in history. Now, I've just got a few. Does somebody want to do that? And I've got one for Brian for sure for this meeting because he invited me here, but I've got a couple others. So if you want one during the break, let me know. And if you can play it at a meeting, please do. If you just want to take it for yourself and listen to it, maybe we'll make you another one later on or something. I want this to go to meetings where people will be listening to it. So that's the reason why we make these things. So The other thing to get people interested in, some of us write books. Well, I write books too. I write history books. I wrote the history of Richmond, Indiana. It took about 15 minutes to get this big and that big and that big, and so we got it written finally. It took about many years to get it written. And then I got started in, so I wrote a history of Indianapolis. If you're a history-minded person, be careful. It's very dangerous to take pictures. I went to Indianapolis, and I just took some pictures of the old buildings over in Indianapolis that had to do with AA. And so I took them home. I was very satisfied with those pictures. But there's one problem with those pictures. Every one of those pictures had a big question mark on it. And I had to go back to Indianapolis and find that out. Next. I had a whole book. It took all summer to do it, but I got a history book of Indianapolis. Well, after that, I didn't bring that with me because most people here wouldn't be interested in Indianapolis, but there's the next book I wrote a few years ago, a pre-AA history book. This is the 9 years before AA started. What happened? It's not like way back in time. It's compressed in a very short period of time, and so I wrote that. And then just recently, I wrote this Ebby in Exile, a vital AA link. It shows how Ebby, getting kicked out of his hometown, caused Alcoholics Anonymous to happen. Because he wouldn't have been kicked out of his hometown, AA wouldn't be. He's a vital link, an important link. And in this time, thousands of these books have gone out. I like to say it this way. I've sold thousands of these books. That's good news. But the bad news is I didn't make any money. And the reason I didn't make any money is because I sell them for free. And so any of you want one of these books, or two of them, I'll send you both of them through the email. You can print it up yourself on your computer, or just leave it on your PC for reference. And so I brought this with me. This pen is mine, by the way. And I'm going to pass this around, and everybody, please be very careful how you write, because out of 10 names, I'll get two emails wrong, because I think an I is a 1 or whatever, I'll get mixed up. So be very careful if you do that. I'll pass this around, and I'll be glad to send you one. Email so you have both these books, or other things that you like. You might want Dawn of Hope, maybe I can get you one of those. That'd be a special order, not on there, but let me know. It's kind of the commercial beginning part of the reading, and so that's the commercials. Somebody said when they read chapter the 9-step promise, that's commercials. I don't know if that's right or not. That certainly makes you enthused about AA, doesn't it? I mean, that's good. Okay, as I say, a little bit about me and how we're getting into the history of it. I am Bob Stonebreaker, a member of the Fourth Dimension group of Richmond, Indiana, which is slowly not there right now, but we have for 25 years. And it's called the Fourth Dimension group. That's mentioned twice in the big book, by the way, page 8, page 25, but we're going to read that. But yet, what happened was, it was 1985, I was about 9 years sober, 10 years sober, and I was down in Palm Beach, Florida, and just down there in the general area. And I went to a meeting, and a guy named Dell, he's gone now, so his last name Heckendorf, great big old tough guy, he's a football player, he was talking to somebody about the big book. And I said, I just started telling him what I thought I knew about the big book. He said, listen, he's about that tall. He said, you shut your mouth or you get out the door. And I'll tell you, he didn't say it that way either. Thank God I had enough humility to listen. And I learned, and I learned, and I learned. I'm going to tell you what they did. This is a little off the history, but it's important. Because it's very unusual. But it was not too unusual in the older days of alcoholics. If you get into history, and you see how Dr. Bott took Earl Treat through the steps in a few hours there on page 263 of your fourth edition books. But anyway, they invite newcomers to breakfast, 2 or 3 of them, nice. Buy a breakfast. Then they take them down a couple blocks down the road there. There's a real estate office that's vacant. And they sit there and they talk, these 3 or 4, about 10 people converge, maybe 12 on these 2 or 3 newcomers. And they talk about steps 1 and 2, and they have the newcomers pray the 3rd step prayer. And lo and behold, they'd set them down and have them start writing step 4, just like that. Huh. And they get done doing that, they get a pizza pie, they eat a pizza, and then they separate those guys and send them to little cubbyhole rooms and do steps 5, 6, and 7 with them individually, and back to the main table, do 8 and 9, and by midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, they're at 10, 11, and 12. And the groups are well, that's not going to work. They poo-pooed that, but before long, they were sending hard cases to us down to the fourth dimension group. I joined that group. So I started thought that's a good idea. Some years later, a couple of years later, I'm out in California, and I started doing the same thing out there, except not that fast, a couple days in the steps. And I still take a couple days doing this. Clarence Snyder just 2 days to the steps. And we grew. First thing you know, we had 4 meetings out there. I came back to Richmond, Indiana, and Ron P., some of you probably know who he is. He came over to Richmond, spent 1.5 years with us learning what we do, and it's not a real popular kind of a lifestyle for a meeting, because our meeting, there's no experience, strength, and hope. You have all the opinions you want, but you can't discuss until the meeting's over with. And you listen. You know, it's like studying algebra. The teacher teaches and you listen. That's what it was like. And a lot of people learned a lot. And most alcoholics don't want to get taught. Don't you teach me, I'll figure it out myself. And that's okay, but some did. And next thing you know, Ron goes to Dayton. He starts one there. And we got about 8 meetings all around Dayton. It's still going. They're not all called fourth dimension, but they use our format, they use our big chart and all kinds of stuff like that. And then to keep it short, the internet helps out. We got some in St. Louis, got Indianapolis, going 15 years now. And we got meetings in UK, over United Kingdom. We got them in Canada. We got them. We had one in Switzerland for a while, and just all around. We got them all over the place. We got 30 of these kind of teaching meetings using our format. We don't all do it the same way. I mean, most people, but that's kind of what got me started. And in the middle of all this stuff, I started being an archives guy, and I got interested. And I thought, well, we got a nice display. I'm lucky. Some of you might have known Tom Ross is his name. He's gone now. He died with 55 years sober. He's up in Greenville, Ohio. Does anybody here know him? He died about 6-7 years ago. Anyway, he gave me tables and stuff. I got 5 tables of archives. I'm going to show them off. They're wonderful, but they're not all relevant. But so he told me all that stuff, and I got more interested in the history. And so I started reading different books. I joined something called, you can write this down if you like. You've got something to write on. I got a lot of things to say you might want to write, so you can write on any of this paperwork I got somewhere. And if you want another, and there's extra anyway. Write AA History Lovers website. That's a wonderful history website. It's got all the people who write the AA books on it. Mel Barger's on there, and Arthur Sheehan's on there, and Ernie Kurtz is on there, and all these people that you know write on that stuff. It's very, very good. They don't give their opinion about things. It's all fact, and they bibliography with it, so you know where it comes from. They didn't just say it because they think it. They said it because they tell what book they got it from. It might be right, it might be wrong. They'll argue about it, but yet it comes from somewhere. And so I got into that, and with the archives, and besides, and so one of the first books I read was AA Comes of Age, and then it was Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. And these books here, this was written in 1980, and like AA Comes of Age, kind of like a documentary book. This is like a storybook. As is this one here, this is about Dr. Bob, obviously. This is about Bill Wilson, also a storybook. Both of them very interesting, full of good history. And if you want to get started in AA history, these are 2 books I suggest to read right to begin with. And, while I'm here, before I forget it, you probably all know this. This is a $12 book. Your district might have one already. And this is a replica out of GSO of the original big book. And so that's good. You can get those for $12. Getting started directly on the history. talk about here. First, you have open the number 1 here on your pre-A history synopsis. We'll talk about Rowland Hazard. Before I talk about Rowland, I'm going to pass this around. Who's my passer-outer person? You want to come passer-outer person? Okay. This here is William James. He wrote Varieties of Religious Experience. You're going to find out, I won't mention much more in this, but he had to do when Bill Wilson had a vital spiritual experience. He read that, and also he has a lot to do with step 2 of our 12 steps. And you can figure it out on your own if you realize what that book's about and all like that. But Rowland Hazard was from a very wealthy family. They came over to Rhode Island, which wasn't even called it at the time, I suppose, but it was, his family his early family goes way back to just after the Mayflower, and so you go way back to the 1600s. So an old country, old family. They raised sheep, they became in the woolen industry, and as the time went on, they learned how to dye the wool, and they got interested in chemicals, and now they became part of Allied Chemical, which is worth like $18 billion a few years ago. I mean, of course, they're all gone now, but that's the kind of family they were. They had millions of dollars, very wealthy, big estates, more than one all around. And Rowland was a very, very wealthy guy, and so that's important to know about him. We'll talk about him just a little bit now. He's on page 27 of the big book. He's the guy Carl Jung was talking to, a businessman there on that. And so he couldn't stay sober. That was his problem. And he didn't know what to do about it. But his brother had some kind of emotional problem, no matter what it is. But he went over to see Dr. Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist over in Zurich, Switzerland. And his brother said, why don't you go visit with him? And so he did in 1926. The stock story is 1931, which isn't right, I think. This is 1926 was the first visit. There might have been one in 1928 and also another one in 1931. But this is who he came to see if Carl Jung could fix him. And so I pass this around. Pass her out a person. This goes on through the whole meeting, just continue on. And this, now I'm going to tell you the false. Some of you probably know about it. You heard this already, that he thought about visiting the what's her name, Sigmund Freud and Alfred Edison, these two other more famous psychiatrists in the world, but somehow they couldn't work with him. And they were both more halfway atheists. And so we always lament that Bill wouldn't, that Rowland wouldn't have heard about a spiritual experience had he gone to them. So goes the story. You probably heard that. Some of you maybe haven't. It's been discounted. I don't believe it. Most historians don't believe it happened. We believe he went directly to Carl Jung. Here's these pictures here, and here's a picture of Carl Jung, young and older, if you're interested in that. Who's got their big book with them? Likes to read? Anybody? Can you read real loud? You're closer. You read? Page, let's go to page 27. And on page 26, we got Carl Jung visiting the doctor. He can't stay sober for nothing. He tries. He once gets drunk. He's been in 26. He can't do any good. Now it's 1931 when this event here takes place. I believe this event takes place, maybe his third visit with the doctor. And will you read from the first full paragraph of page 27?
How far do you want me to read?
I'll tell you when to stop.
All right. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. The conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent of those who do." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a climb. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, Alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences.
Boom! There is a solution to alcoholism. Nobody knew that before in the general run. Of course, preachers have been talking about it, but yet that comes to us today. That he said that. How important? Go ahead.
To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them.
Period. Okay, thank you. That's good. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes are suddenly cast aside, and a brand new set of ideas, emotions, and attitudes take over. And how do you remember that? How many people saw The Wizard of Oz? Okay. Who was the first person she ran into along the yellow brick road? Scarecrow. What was wrong with him? Didn't say. No ideas. Okay. Who's the next person it was? Tin Man. Had no heart, couldn't feel, no emotion, see, no emotion. Who was the next one? The lion, you know, he couldn't act, he couldn't do nothing, see, so ideas, emotions, and attitudes, you think of that. And when was the big book written? 39. When did The Wizard of Oz come out? 39 too, eh? Yeah, okay. So somebody jokingly said maybe Bill Wilson wrote the big book after The Wizard of Oz. Maybe it came first. Some AA joke, maybe not very funny, but it's a joke anyway. And it's something that's real important here, I think, for all of us. He says, in fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement in you. With many individuals, the method I employed is successful, but I've never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. I believe that is true today. I've talked to all kind of people, gone to psychiatrists and different things, and all kind of smart guys, and you see. And I think a lot of people go there and they get sober, never drink again. But maybe they're the alcoholic of the hard drinker Bill talks about. They're people who can use self-will and self-knowledge and maybe a little bit of adjustment up there. They get by fine. There aren't those people. We all know them, you know. But a real alcoholic, that's somebody who cannot use self-will and cannot use self-knowledge. They're stuck. And I think we have to have a power greater than ourselves to fix ourselves. So it says self cannot rid self of self with self. So obviously you've got to have a power greater than self, whatever that is, but there's something out there that's fixing all these people. We had 2 people in AA back in 1935, and now we got 2 million. Something's going on pretty good. And this power, most of them say that power is what helped them. So that's the idea of that maybe psychiatrists are good and all that. But for somebody of your description, that is to say a real alcoholic, we need something power greater than ourselves to fix it. And that seems to hold true today. Somehow, Roland goes back to New York, and he's got to find some kind of a way to get one of those vital spiritual experiences. In those days, the Oxford group was really big. It was just going all over the place. They had as high as 15,000 people at one of their big get-togethers and stuff like that, were known around the world. They were not a particular religion. They weren't even really a religion at all. They were a group of people who might be, mostly were Presbyterians, Methodists, and stuff like that, and they were Protestants, and mostly not any Catholics were there at that time. But they talk about what they thought. They actually, the name of the thing was First Century Christian Fellowship was the name of this outfit when he got there. But at one time they changed the name. As a matter of fact, when he got there, it was called the Oxford Group at the time. They changed. There's something to remember about the Oxford Group. It changed from First Century Christian Fellowship to the Oxford Group because these were all rich people. They were not interested in fixing drunks at all, or individuals so much at all. They want to fix the whole world. They want to fix countries at a time. And they want to change the whole world. If everybody in the precepts of Jesus Christ, then they would think there'd be much less crime, there'd be less wars, poverty might go away, etc. Good things are going to happen to the world, so they're going to change the whole world. They got lofty ideas. And they're rich, and they're in Africa, and they've got their own train they're riding on this train, and of course they got their own car, they don't set everybody else in. So somebody said, who's back there in that back? And the conductor, that said Oxford bunch, because he ran around with the Oxford University students a lot, and that's who was back there. So it got the name Oxford. That's how it got that name. But to remember, it's personally called the First Century Christian Fellowship. It had a bad thing happen in 1936. Frank Buchman is the person who started, not Buchman, it's Buchman. He said some nice things about Adolf Hitler, because Adolf Hitler was against those communists who were atheists down there in Russia, and he was against them. So he said some nice things about the guy who was against the atheists, see? And then we all know what Adolf Hitler did, and that caused the demise and almost the end of the Oxford Group. They even had to change their name of the Oxford Group after that, and they lost their membership, and fickle as all that might be. But they did a lot of wonderful things. And one of the most wonderful things they did is to give us our 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you didn't know that most of our 12 steps come directly out of that. And I'd pass this around, picture him. Some of you old enough to know who Mae West was. This is a joke picture. He's with Mae West. She's a lady of, she's one of the wild ladies of those days, like Madonna would be in our day or something like that or whatever. Yeah. It's all got passe these days, but nonetheless. So he goes over the Oxford Group and gets to New York, and he stays there. He stays sober a little bit, and then he's not doing good. He's drunk again. He goes back and forth, and he goes somewhere else up in Boston, and that didn't work out very well. But he was on and off. He didn't really give it a good shot. He didn't really do the things they said to do, but I don't know. It wasn't working, the main thing is. But, now let's jump ahead in time. Let's go up to 1938, and Roland, of course, he's got places, got houses. They call it a cottage. I think it had 10 or 11 bedrooms up in Vermont. And I had a picture of it somewhere. I don't have it with me. But, he's up there, a big swimming pool, and they're having a nice time. It's a little bit below Manchester, Vermont. And there's word of somebody who was a friend of one of the Oxford Group members who's having trouble with being sober. And they made a decision to go out and maybe help this guy. This guy's name is Ebby Thatcher. And this is a picture of Ebby as a young man. Ebby was an interesting person. He grew up with a spoon in his mouth. Some of the things here about he had his grandfather was mayor of Albany, New York, and his uncle had been mayor of Albany, New York. At this present time, in the early 30s, his brother Jack was mayor of Albany, New York. In 1932, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president for being governor, he stood to run for governorship of the whole state of New York. This is the kind of family that Ebby came from. And I have pictures in this book here with Ebby's father playing with the President of the United States, Taft, and so on like that. And so they were really, really wealthy people. But Ebby looked a lot like his brother. And if you're a politician, you don't want a drunken Ebby around getting in trouble all the time, and that's bad for publicity. You're looking for votes. So Ebby, why don't you leave Albany, exiled him, and you live in our house over here. They had a summer cottage, they call it. They bought, in 1923, they bought this summer cottage over in the Manchester, Vermont. And here's a picture of Ebby. And this is a picture of the house where Ebby was sent to. There's two pictures of it there. The back of that's a courthouse too, but I'll send this along too, but this is the same group of pictures. So Ebby was there. Well, his first 6 months, Ebby stayed sober. He took a job in the mountains, up clearing bushes in the mountains and all that. Imagine a guy with his prestige doing that, but he stayed sober for 6 months doing that. He came down off the mountaintop, and next thing you know, he drunk again. And one of his escapades, he's driving his father's Packard, so goes the story, and he somehow loses control of it, drunk, and runs into the side of this lady's house. And just maybe not too hard, but he ran into it anyway. And she came up to see what happened, He said, good afternoon, ma'am. Would be a good time for a spot of coffee, would it not? She didn't think that was funny at all. She called the police, and so, but he got off the hook on that one. But yet he had two of these kind of things against him. And in Vermont, time number 3, you were assigned to Brattleboro Insane Asylum where he was at for 6 months. And he was like a cooked goose. He's in deep chicken fat trouble. He was scared. And this is a wonderful story. AA depends on this story I'm going to tell you. Ebby was never a very religious man. Matter of fact, these Oxford group people, these two here, which is Shep Graves and Shep Cornell, these two people were Oxford groupers. They've been trying to help him get sober before these things happened. Ebby said, go to hell. He'd be sitting his hand on his knees and he's just feeling awful. He's drinking himself to death, actually. And he said, and he wasn't paying attention to him at all. But this got his attention this time. I'll tell you what happened to him. Ebby got drunk again, and he just got through painting his house, or helping paint it to get it done. He had some help with it. But there's some pigeons up on that house, and he didn't like those pigeons being there. And he's drunk. It was night. It was pouring down rain. They don't stop a drunk. He's got this 12-gauge shotgun. He goes out here and bang, he's shooting these pigeons up there. Well, the shotgun knocked him down. There he just lay on his back. Boom, boom. He didn't care. He just lay in the mud shooting the pigeons. Neighbors saw it. And, of course, it was reported. Well, respectful people like that. The neighborhood, Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's son, lived across the street from them at one time. This is the kind of neighborhood they're in. You don't have the police coming in and that, but Ebby's on the books. He's going to have to go to court somewhere, and he knew it. He stayed drunk a few days, didn't leave the house. He finally goes downtown after about 3 days, couldn't stand home anymore, and he's sitting on a hardware store. That picture's in here, the hardware store. This is 1934. This is late summer, and the sheriff comes by, or the deputy, whatever it was, and told him he had to go to court. They took him down to court, and the judge happened to be the guy that tried to help him, Shep Bray's father, Judge Graves, told Ebby. He said, okay, Ebby, these guys are all in. They're all rich people. He said, well, if you come back here Monday morning, I'm going to let you off the hook. And you could go down with Roland Hazard, and maybe these Oxford groupers you live with Roland Hazard, and maybe he could help you get sober. And so Ebby, a very unspiritual man now. Mind this is important. He goes home. And he's pacing back and forth. And if you have ever been drunk, and so on like that on a Friday or like that, you're sitting there like that, you're shaking, you need to drink awful bad. He ain't got anything to drink. He's got 3 little Ballantine ales down the basement, all there is. But he goes down, and I could take a sip on those, and it would be, and calm you down at least. Nobody knows the difference anyway, and you're probably thinking. But Ebby was he's part of the Eastern establishment. Hill fellows well met, you might say. He had a respectful person, an honest person you could be. He said to himself, no, that wouldn't be playing the game square the way he looked at it. He said, no, if I take him out, because the judge bet not to drink anything. He took those, AA defended it. He took those 3 bottles of ale, Valentine's ale, and gave it to a neighbor. Thank God. He goes back and appears in court Monday morning, sober. And the judge let him off the hook. Well, he goes home. Well, this actually happened before he got off the hook. He went home. Now, let's go back to Friday, Saturday. I've got the man of my story here. Saturday, he goes home after the activity clears away. He began to feel kind of relief. He got his knee. And I heard him give this talk on a recording I have at home. In 1951 recording he did. And he said he prayed with all his heart. He could never pray like that before in his life. Well, God, just take the relief of his alcohol stuff. Take it away. I don't want to look at it again. And all at once, Ebby had a release. It lasted 2 years and 7 months. Wonderful. Now, isn't that God at work? All that story I tell you. The judge was him off the hook. He goes with a bullet hazard to get sobered up and so on like that. He does. It took 2 years and 7 months. Which is was enough time for him to carry the message to Bill Wilson. As we kind of know, most of you kind of know, he carried the message to Bill in 1935. And so 1934, and actually that was in the late, a couple months after that, maybe around November, something like that. Here's some of the things about what I told you about. He goes down. Now, Ebby had a choice. He'd been sober. He stayed rolling for a few weeks. He had a choice. Now, he could go back home. Now he's sober. His brother's going to let him come back. He could live with a spoon in his mouth and have servants, everything if he wanted to. But he had some kind of conversion experience. This is very important, I think, in Alcoholics Anonymous, because he had this conversion. He thought, no, I've got this thing, I'm not drinking, I can help other people. So he allows Roland to take him down to Calvary Mission with a bunch of smelly old sot drunks down there, live with them and try to help them get sober. Now, isn't that a great thought? I mean, he had a change. I think when people have a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism to some degree or another, they become a different person, a new man. And I think that's what happened. Now, this is a picture of the parish house where the Oxford groupers would meet in those days. And again, this is a house where, as fate would have it, that Ebby's house was there, but you see his house here, that's Lois Wilson's parents' house. It was connected to it. Isn't that an amazing coincidence that would happen? Yeah, that's the way fate comes together. And this is some pictures. This is the Calvary Mission here. It took a long time to get that picture. That's the inside of it. This is the church where Shoemaker was and where they all went for a long time. This is the Calvary meeting place. And they had one time they had some drunks in there. They thought if they're just kind to these drunks, they'll be you can just treat them nice with kid gloves and just be so nice to them. So they got a bunch of drunks up there in this beautiful, beautiful place. These are millionaires all live here. And what did the drunks do? Well, they threw a shoe to a stained glass window. And they kind of lost their idea about drunks of that. So they weren't too interested in drunks when Ebby and them started coming up. But they had the Calvary Mission and keep it going. But they didn't get invited with the other people. This is a better picture too. Pass that around if you would, please. Okay. Now Ebby's sober. And he's helping these drunks. He supposedly worked very well with drunks. He was a good 12-stepper and helped them a lot. Of course, it wasn't called 12-step then. It was just the Oxford group. And in the Oxford group, you get your knees, you have a surrender. They had a special kind of surrender, which Ebby did at one point. You turn your life over to God on your knees, and that was what was done in those days. And everybody liked Ebby. They hang around Sturrock's cafeteria. You'll read about that somewhere if you study the history. That was nearby, and they all had a wonderful time. But he started thinking, my buddy Bill, he knew Bill Wilson. And, Bill and he did one drunk together. You hear they used to drink together and so on like that. I heard Ebby tell this, they only had one drunk together. And it was a night, they were in Albany, New York, and he and Bill, this is 1929. This is January of 1929. And they were up all night drinking, and they decided, Bill had to go the next day he was going to go to Manchester, Vermont, just 60 miles away. Not a very nice drive. They're drunk. They decided, well, what if we just flew an airplane in there? And so they had some called barnstormers back in those days. And don't forget, airplanes are really something new back in those days. I'm so old myself, way older than you think I am. But when I was young, like the 1930s, we look at airplane. You see, everybody's all excited about you seeing an airplane. It's wonderful, see? And so that was those kind of days. So it's a big deal to land there. And so Bill says nobody had landed there before. Well, they had, but he said they hadn't. But so they take off this barnstorm, all drunk, 3 of them drunk. They take off like this over the mountains, or the Taconic Mountains, and come down. They land at the airport. And Bill claims, if you read about it, the high school band was out there. Everybody's out there celebrating. So they landed. Here's Bill and Ebby get off. He said we both fell down drunk right in front of everybody. Disgraced the whole thing. He spent a whole day writing that report. So that's the only time he and Ebby, but Ebby knew each other. They knew each other in school days. They went to Barn and Burton school when they were teenagers. So they knew each other from way back then. So coming back to New York, he says, I think maybe I could help Bill out. And this is the famous kitchen table story. he calls up Bill's wife, Lois Wilson, here, and this is a good picture of Bill here, and he gets permission to come over there and have luncheon with them and have a talk and this and that and the other. And she said, oh, yeah, that'd be fine. And Bill Wilson's waiting there, and here comes Evie. Well, he's all excited about Evie being here. They could talk about all the time. Here's a nice picture of Bill and Lois when she was young. And, they're all excited about this. And this is the kitchen table I'm going to be telling you about here, too. And so he goes over and talks to Bill, and this is what happens. Page 9 of your big book, you want to follow me along with me on this here. I go to a halfway house. The last 15 years I've been going there, and half of the people in halfway house are not very interested in what me being there at all, because that's the way things are sometimes. But I like to read this. This is a big message. I think a historical message here that's really important. And the door opened, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. That's Evie. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's this all about? I queried. He looked straight at me, and simply but smiling, he said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last sermon, alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspect a little fact about religion. He had that starry-eyed look, all right. Yes, the old boy's on fire, right, but bless his heart and let him rant. Besides, my gin will last longer than his preaching. Well, it didn't. It didn't. And that's a wonderful thing, because this is where Ace is going to get started here now, see? He takes off. A few days later, Evie goes home. They had a long conversation. I guess they talked about the old times, but they also talked about the Oxford group. And this is important. I'd like to get across to you here. What was the essence of Evie's message in a word? 2 words, perhaps. Let's see what it was that Evie brought to him. But he did no ranting. As a matter of fact, he told how 2 men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They told of a simple religious idea that's a vital spiritual experience and a practical program of action. This was the 4 absolutes of the Oxford group, along with some tenets of living that they had to go by. So he brought this message, and this is where it comes. This first century Christian fellowship comes to Bill. He's got these ideas. He see what they did. And we hear it today, and a vital spiritual experience. We read about that in step 12. And a spiritual program of action. Well, that's all our steps. So that's what it is. The Oxford group brought us most all of our 12 steps of today. And it's important to know that. But it had an effect on Bill because he got sober, a little bit sober. 2 or 3 days later, I'm going to go down to that mission and see what that Evie's doing. So he gets on a subway. He lives just near the Brooklyn Bridge in Brooklyn Heights. I've been to his house. And there he's going to cross there. But on the way, he meets a guy named Alex the Finn. And Alex the Finn decided, well, before they go there, they were going to go together then. They thought they'd go see what's going on there. And they said, well, let's have a beer. So they had a drink, and next thing you know, they're both drunk. But Bill still goes. He gets in there. They're going to talk about how they stay sober. You get there, you stand at the podium, you talk, and tell how you got sober. Praise the Lord, hallelujah, and all that. Bill's all drunk. He staggers up there at the podium, and he starts talking about, They had to give him some beans to get him off the stage, I guess, and so on like that. But he met his spiritual mentor, Sam Shoemaker, at that time, Reverend Sam Shoemaker. He said, I could see that Bill was an exceptional person at that time. He had a suit he paid $5 for, and so he's dressed up, and everybody else dressed the way they do in a mission. So he kind of stood out there a little bit. Well, still drunk. Okay. About a few days later. Now this is an important thing. Good date to remember. I always celebrate that on the internet. The 11th day of December, 1934. Bill leaves the house. He's going to go to town's hospital where he's been 3 times before now. This is his 4th visit. He got drunk every time, and his brother-in-law paid for it. But he said, well, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to get sober, and so on. He had some paperwork in one hand, He's walking toward the subway entrance, and there's a grocery store where his wife had a little bit of credit. The family had a little credit in there. Well, what's he going to do? What's he going to do, you suppose? He got 4 bottles of beer. That's what he did. He drank 1, 2, 3. He offered one on the subway, and the guy wouldn't take it. So what's he do with the last one? He's got in his hand. He's got paperwork in one hand, and booze and the bottle of beer. He walks in the town's hospital, so goes the story. Hey, Doc, I got the answer. So they took him down, probably strapped him down in bed, gave him the cold treatment. They strapped up his sheets and stuff like that. Gave him the belladonna treatment. And, it was really something back. And they had to be sturdy people back in those days. I want to read you something about the kind of treatment that they had in those days. I will read it to you. If you get the book, there's a picture of all these bottles here, but you can't see them. You can't see it. This is what I'm going to read to you. The belladonna treatment. This is the 11th day of December, 1934. I like to repeat that date because I think it's important to remember it. The mixture was given every hour. The belladonna treatment. The mixture was given every hour, day and night, for nearly 50 hours. A long time. The end of the treatment was marked by abundance of stools and castor oil given to a patient as a further purgative. Imagine that. Castor oil. Ugh. The treatment is also described puke and purge. Every 12 hours, the patient is given compound cathartic pills and a blue mass, whatever that is. These were 19th century medications of varying compositions. Blue mass included mercury and was prescribed for a different kind of ailments. When a patient was admitted to the hospital while intoxicated at the end of his spree, the first thing that was done was to put the patient to sleep. The only medication given prior with the hypnotic was 4 of these pills. The hypnotic Lamport found best, that's Dr. Lamport, found best contained chlorohydrate and morphine, along with 1 or 2 grams of paraldehyde. Got it. Paraldehyde. If the patient went to sleep easily on this hypnotic, it was safe to give victim every hour for his belladonna regimen. Dr. Lamport believed it was also important to administer a small amount of strychnine every 4 hours. Now, there you are. That's what a treatment that was. Huh? Well, you wouldn't want to come back, but they did, and they did again. But whatever happened in the hospital, well, it was a very, very important thing. Bill's sitting in the hospital, and he wonders, what can I do to stay sober? Now, let's say it's the 14th. Nobody knows exactly, but most historians think it was the 14th day of January. When this takes place, I want to read to you. He's in the hospital, and he's really repentant, and he wants to quit drinking, but he's he's probably plagued with that mental obsession that we all know about. The real significance of my experience at the cathedral burst upon me. That's when he's in England a long time ago. He had a religious deal when he was younger. For a brief moment, I wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those in myself, so it had been so ever since. How blind had I been? Now, I hear defeat in his voice now. He's kind of defeated. He's really defeated. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Thank God for us. Treatment seemed wise, for I'd showed signs of delirium tremens. Okay. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him. What's step that sound like? Step 3, right? Okay, step 3. As he would, I placed myself undeservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, and with him, without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins. Step 4, and became willing to have my newfound friend, God, take them away, root and branch. Newfound friends capitalized, that's God. Step 6 and 7. I've not had a drink since. My schoolmate, that's Ebby, visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. That's step 5. We made a list of people I'd hurt and toward whom I felt resentment, and expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. The essence of 8 and 9. Never was I to be critical of them, as to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. I was to test my thinking with my new God conscious within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. And that's kind of like step 10, I guess. Somebody thought that. I don't know. Here it goes. He says, I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except that as my request bore my usefulness to others, only then might expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. Step 11 for you, see? And then the first part of step 12 is here too. My friend promised that when these things were done, I would enter a new relationship with our Creator. And so on. So that's the first part of step 12, having had a spiritual experience. And so you see, Bill does this in bed, probably still half drunk, and he has a vital spiritual experience on the next page. See? And somebody thinks, oh, you take a long, long time to do steps. All kind of ways people have to do it. I'm not critical of every way to do it, but yet you see what he did in a very, very fast order. He did the prerequisite to cause what I'm going to read to you next. And this is what happened next. On page 14, first full paragraph. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father Light who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up until the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. And that was his vital spiritual experience. For a moment, I was alarmed. I called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Funny thing, Bill Wilson's later on psychiatrist, Dr. Tebow, said to inform me. He said, well, yes, Bill, you're a mentally sane, but you're emotionally crazy. I think that's true for a lot of alcoholics, including me. So he goes on. Finally, he shook his head, saying, something's happened to you I don't understand, but you better hang on to it. Anything's better than the way you were. The good doctor now knows many men who have such experience. He knows they are real. Well, that's something he didn't know, but he could see it. He read about it, and we know it's real. But how do we know it's real? Bill didn't know, but what he had a hallucination. How would he know the difference? Well, at this point, Debbie Thatcher came in. Some people say it was Roland Hazard. I think the problem might have been him. Writing this book, it's where William James can get the varieties of religious experience. A very difficult book. We were talking about a friend of mine before here. And this book, it's very difficult. He must have skimmed over it. He said he read the book. He couldn't have read a book like that in a short period of time. But he got the idea from this book that the people who had these vital spiritual experiences through the ages had one thing in common. They were deflated at depth, and he certainly was deflated at depth. And a couple other things he identified with it in this. So he decided, yes, I probably really had a vital spiritual experience, thank God. And because he had that thought, this is what he started thinking. I just wrote an article about this morning. While I lay in a hospital, this is the proof. How do we know this is how we know that he had a vital spiritual experience. While in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had so freely been given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. What an idea. Yeah, I could do that. Yeah. So Bill entered the hospital, as we said, on the 11th day of December 1934. He leaves 1 week later on the 18th day. I think it's on a Tuesday. Doesn't matter. He walks out of the hospital. Now, if you read about Bill Wilson, you know Bill Wilson, what it was in his life, he wanted to be a big shot on Wall Street. He wanted to be playing golf with the pros. He wanted to be all that and rich and everything like that. Matter of fact, he made $750 million at least on paper on Wall Street before the 1929 crash, and he was doing good at one time. That's a lot of money today compared to today. I mean, you take that times 10 today. I mean, it's a lot of money for your luck, though. But he was a very important man. He walks out of town hospital. He can go two directions. He can go to Wall Street, in the middle of Manhattan. So as you go down to 23rd Street, at that Mission down there, there's a bunch of old smelly drunks. Where'd he go? Because of what he thought in that hospital, because he had had a vital spiritual experience of transformation. He goes down to work with the drunks. They took one home with him. And he fed him. And he prayed for him. And he told him what had happened to him. And everything. Surely, I can understand that. But guess what the drunk did? He got drunk. Did he go to one? No. He goes back again, gets another one, and he got drunk. He got another, he got drunk. And he got drunk. Every other day, just when they all get drunk, they all got drunk. Goes on for 3 months, 4 months, they all got drunk, every one of them. He told his wife Lois, he said, honey, I think I'm a flop at this, these drunks. He said, honey, this is real important. But remember, you're still sober. That goes on in our story as time goes on. He was sober. You could see that was keeping him sober. Somebody said he worked with 50 drunks in that 4 months. This begins in December, or probably actually maybe the 1st of January. January, February, March, April, those 4 months, he worked all these things. Lois is, thank God for the women of those days. She worked at Leo's a department store trying to keep things going. He didn't have any money, and they were just very poor, getting by. But he took these drunks home and fed them, everything like that, out of her money. And he felt bad. Maybe he should go back to work, he thought. And Dr. Silkworth told him something pretty important. I think we all should know this, too. Dr. Silkworth was the doctor. I'm going to get behind on my paperwork here. Let me send some of these around here. This is Clinton Street. And this is where Bill lived. That's Bill's house. That's Bill and Abby together at one point. This is another picture of Clinton Street. And this is a picture of the kitchen table where that famous talk took place. That table is still in Bedford Hills at Stepping Stones today. You can go there and visit it. Still there, preserved after all this time. I think that's wonderful. This is where they live now, and so on, like that. And then this is Dr. Silkworth, the guy who told Bill what I want to tell you now. He said to Dr. Silkworth tells you, he said, Bill, you've been trying to jam that religious stuff down those people's throats, but that vital, the hot flash you had, that vital spiritual experience, and they're not going to take that. These drunks have been sitting and singing for their supper for years. They already heard all that stuff. They ain't got religious stuff. You can't tell them that stuff. You tell them about these two things. And talk about step one. When we study step one, we find there are two major parts of it. Step one, we take a shot of whiskey, we can't stop for nothing. It's called a phenomenal craving after the first drink. And that's one part. And the other part, and we're still not to hill of beans, the first drink is perfectly okay. I got it right now, but I haven't drank, so it don't matter. But the problem we got is before we take a drink, it's called a mental obsession. And that's the only problem we got, but it's exactly what AA would solve today. Well, they didn't know about that. But he said, you tell about the physical allergy and the mental obsession. They'll understand that. So he had that in mind. And so he finally goes back to Wall Street, and this one friend of his was delighted to see him sober. And rich guy, and there's a stock takeover by a machine company down in Akron, Ohio. And Bill decided he was going to go down there and maybe help with this stock takeover. If he took it over, he could be president of the company maybe and have a lot of money. He'd be rich again, everything would be fine. So he leaves New York. He heads down for Akron, Ohio. And while he goes to Akron, Ohio, he headed down there. We could all be headed outside to smoke a cigarette or have a little break, or he'd drink some coffee and do some stuff we want to do. And we'll come back in about 10 minutes or so, if you don't mind. 15 minutes maybe, okay? Okay, welcome back, everybody. I feel very flattered to speak in a prestigious room such as this, a municipal building and so on. I remember one time I was 19 years old. I was in a municipal building. My father was there. I was there. And the reason I was there, I was down the bootleg area of my hometown, North 12th Street. And Uncle Bill's all right around there. Very reputable place. And I was running down the street, and Hank Woods, the cop, was chasing after me. So I turned around with a great big swing at old Hank Woods, missed him probably that far. So boom, right across the side of my ear. And I wake up my dad on Monday morning. Judge Hurlitz is my judge there. Now I did that same year, at 19 years old. I've been to that judge twice before we did it. He said that my father's in the audience sobbing, what am I going to do to his idiot son? And the judge said, I don't feel sorry for you. You disgrace your mother. You disgrace your father. 90 days of penalty for him. Boy, he was mad. I got something to the door. The sheriff knew my dad, or deputy sheriff. He knew my dad. Not know the good thing about it. Well, I'll tell you what happened. I quit drinking forever at 19 years old. And then at 20 years old, I quit drinking forever. At 21 years old, I quit drinking forever. And for many, many years, and not 1 year ever went by, but what, I quit drinking forever. And I always got drunk. And so I got the Alcoholics Anonymous. Now I haven't quit drinking forever. I had the problem removed. Wonderful program of action. So just being a court, it's quite different this time than being a courtroom back then. So I wanted to bring that up. So we're talking about Bill Wilson. Now he's leaving New York, and I got a little stuff I can read here about what was going on then. Business friend Howard Tompkins, he's from New York, of Beer and Company, sent Bill to attempt to take over in a proxy fight for National Rubber and Machine Company. And so he goes down there to like a stock takeover. And it looks like things are going pretty good. If it turns out well, he may be president of the corporation. He become wealthy, have money again. His wife Lois will have to stop working, supporting everybody, and things are really looking up. But at the last minute, the vote went the wrong way, and all of his friends went back to New York and left Bill to spend the rest of the summer there to do legal work, because there's still some chance we could make it happen, but it looked as though it wasn't going to happen. And so here's Bill. He's at the Mayflower Hotel. Put these over here. And this is the Mayflower Hotel. How many people have been there? Okay. We had a trip to Akron. Could we pass this around? Before I forget to tell you this, last September, less than a year ago, we had a trip out of Dayton. There's going to be a trip out of Dayton you probably know about already. Going to have to this next fall and go to Akron, go to all around all the different places in Akron. You leave the Alco Age Club at Dayton at 8 o'clock in the morning and get back that night about midnight. It's a wonderful thing to do. If you haven't seen it, you'll see ads about it around. Well, they did it last September, and we did all that stuff. And one of the great honors of my life is when the last thing you do, somebody gives a talk at the Mayflower Hotel in that lobby where I'm going to tell you about, where Bill walks up and down. And I got to give the talk there. And that was like one of the most wonderful things that happened in my life. I get a talk in a room adjacent to the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel. But now here's Bill. He stayed at the Mayflower Hotel. It's built in 1931. Prohibition was in 1931, so it wasn't until 1933 that they would have had built a bar. But by that time, this is 1935. This is May of 1935, May 11th, 1935, and Bill's walking back and forth. Poor Bill's got like $10 in his pocket. His hotel bill's more than that. But he still has money coming from New York because they're sending him money to represent them. And he's walking back and forth, and he's lonesome. And he's disappointed, terribly sad. He hears the laughter coming out of the bar room. Maybe I could go in there and strike up an acquaintance. I wouldn't feel so bad. I have a ginger ale. And his mind started thinking, well, maybe a couple drinks wouldn't hurt. And he got scared to death. And, oh my God, what am I going to do? And he remembered what Lois has told him. Lois told him, when he said he's a flop of working with all those drunks, he said, honey, yes, but you stayed sober. He said, well, yeah, maybe I can find a drunk to work with here in Akron, Ohio. How am I going to do that? He goes over to the telephone booth, and there's a roster there of names. One is called Reverend Tunks. Lois thinks the reason he said Reverend Tunks is because an expression on the East Coast is taken. When you take a walk and he's taking a tunk, I don't know. You're not sure. Nobody knows. But anyway, he picked Reverend Tunks. And Reverend Tunks said, I can't tell you any Oxford group members myself, but I know somebody who can. And he gave him a list of people who could do it. He knew he sent some members. They gave 10 members, but he didn't know which one to send. But he said, I need to work with a drunk. I can't find somebody drunk, and maybe some of the other Oxford group would help me with it, because he's a member of the Oxford group, he said. This is a picture of the bar that looked in those days. So there you are. This is important. It took me many, many years to get this picture. This is not easy to come by. But this is a bar. Not made as a bar to begin with, as I said. If you go to the lobby, how many people been in the lobby? You've all been in the lobby. A lot of you have, right? Go to the lobby. The elevator's this way, the south part. I know it's south. Which way is south? No matter. Go up the stairs and to the right. Go down there. The elevator's here. And over this room over here, here's where the bar was. They got the wrong thing up there. You'll see that during Founders Day, they got an arrow going up. They used to. I think they took it down. And it's upstairs at the other end, but it's not. It's on the same level as before by the elevators. So that's where we thought we figured that one out. So Bill starts calling numbers. He calls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Call maybe 10 people. No answer. Nobody knew. Nobody could help them. They're all going out of town or something, or they didn't know any drunks. And so he gets a hold of Henrietta Seiberling the last one, and he knew who she was. This is Reverend Tunks who gave him that information here. And then this is Henrietta Seiberling at the age she was then, and this is Henrietta Seiberling when she was a young beauty. And she married the Seiberling Tire Company people, which was Goodyear at one time. As a branch off of that, she's very, very wealthy people. Her estate is just acres and acres, a great big, enormous estate. How many people have been to the estate up there? Yeah, good. It's really something to see. It's exciting. But she was living in a gatehouse. She's having a separation from her husband, and she was living in a gatehouse, which is a very nice place. And it's a great place to visit. Well, she said to Bill Wilson, now imagine calling up a millionairess, and he knew who she was. I'm a rum hound out of New York, and I need to work with a drunk. Can you help me? I mean, tell the millionairess this. He almost didn't do it. Thank God he did. And what happened? She said, my God, this is manna from heaven. You come over here right away. Now, why would she say that? Because in the Oxford group, a couple of weeks before, they all knew Dr. Bob was drinking awful bad. He would never admit it. But she went over, she said, we're going to have an Oxford group meeting, a bunch of us, and no pussyfooting around. We're going to tell the truth this time. Sit there. And Dr. Bob, a couple of weeks before, admitted, he said, well, I must have been a secret drinker. Well, if people didn't know it. He said, I can't stop myself from drinking. She told him, I intuitively right. She said, Dr. Bob, you just can't take that first drink. That's all. She knew that somehow. He didn't know it. I was just up there at Akron for Founders Day, and in the archives, they got something here. It's a little bottle about that big. It's a doctor's kind of a bottle, and you talk about him hiding whiskey in his socks. Well, that didn't make sense to me, because even a half-pint bottle in your socks wouldn't fit very well. But a little tiny bottle fit right in your sock. And secret drinker indeed. I know I never carried whiskey in my socks. When I drank, everybody knew I drank. I didn't care. Let people drink with me. I didn't care about it. But anyway, that's what he did. He had been a doctor. He had to be careful. And so she wanted to help him. And it's just like manna from heaven that Bill would call and ask that question. You come over here right away. And some people think he walked over there. It's a long walk, couple miles, I suppose. And Clarence Snyder said Akron, Ohio is a city of hills. It's got 7 hills in it. He said they're all up. All the hills are up. But anyway, whether he walked or took a bus or somehow he went there. But a funny thing is, this is how some archives people are. I know a history guy down in Bloomington, Indiana. He went to the Mayflower Hotel, and he walked, and he counted the steps from one place to the next. I forget how many there were, but so he wanted to see, but he wanted to take the same time. Matter of fact, he called me on the cell phone as he was doing it. Archives people, history people do all kind of things. And but he went there and told her that he had to work with somebody. She told him about Dr. Bob. She called Dr. Bob's house, talked to Ann. This is Ann, of course, this is Dr. Bob. And talked to him and her. But Dr. Bob, it was going to be Mother's Day the next day, and he brought home a potted plant for Ann. And he was potted too. The joke goes he's passed out on a table. It wasn't really true, but he was drunk and they put him to bed. And she said, well, we can't come over now, but maybe we could come over tomorrow. That would be Mother's Day, the 12th day of May, 1935. Now this is an important day for us all to remember. I always like to remember it. And when that day comes up, I always write all over the internet about what a grateful day we should be for this to happen. So Bill goes over. Bill stayed there. I know he spent the night there or went back to the hotel, but he was there the next afternoon. Dr. Bob, his wife, Smitty, his son, came over, and her son, Henrietta Seibling's son, was there too, as well. And you'll see him talking on that Dawn of Hope tape I gave out, and talking about it. This is what the gatehouse looked like in the old days. And wait a minute, hold it. No, it's not. That's a different picture. Anyway. This is the room which they had supper. They called it supper then. And then they retired to the library. This is the library room, and this is still there. Now, if you set this table right here and push a button, Dr. Bob and Bill will start talking to you on that table. It's kind of a mystical thing. I think that's all set up. Kind of funny thing. I never actually been in that room because I was there during Founders Day, and they won't let you in it. But I stuck my hand in it just to feel part of it. So I did get that close to it. That's interesting. That was, so they had a conversation. He said, I'll talk this bird for about 15 minutes. That's tops. I've got to get out of here. He had a hangover. He didn't feel good. And one of the things that Dr. Bill told Dr. Bob, he said, you look like you need a drink. And man, Dr. Bob, this guy knows what he's talking about. And Bill went on to talk about when he took a drink, he couldn't stop drinking for nothing. He went on to talk about when he quit drinking forever, he got drunk again, just like me. And Dr. Bob, I do agree with that, you know. Thank God he didn't start telling Bill all about the religion, because Dr. Bob had been going to the Oxford group for 2.5 years and probably knew a lot more about religion than he did. See, this is not a program of action of knowledge and knowing things. I teach the Big Book. I've been teaching the Big Book for 25 years. I love to teach it. But I don't get anybody sober. No, in fact, what gets you sober? It's one drunk sharing with another drunk. It's a heart, one heart to the next heart. It's called love. This is what makes this work. It is, but there's that identification. But Dr. Bob didn't know about the physicology of mental obsession anyway. But that's good to him knowing it. Kind of convinced this guy knows what he's talking about, and they can feel that. And Dr. Bob left there feeling wonderful. It must have felt wonderful. He had a fellowship of something or other, and oh yeah, this is great. And so what they did, they went out and worked with a drunk. It's called a rake. That means a bad guy, doctor. He wasn't too good of a guy, and he wasn't serious. No, he got drunk and didn't do good. And Dr. Bob always was leery of people who weren't serious about AA all through his life. They wouldn't beg you to join AA back in those days for sure. And it might have had something to do with what happened to Dr. Bob. After that event happened, there was a medical American Medical Association had a big doings every year at the big conference or convention, at Atlantic City, New Jersey, and Dr. Bob always went to that. He always got drunk when he went. They didn't want him to go. Bill Wilson said, "Oh, let him go because he's got to learn it." And so he went. And he was drunk before he got there. And he stayed drunk for several days. I got it here just for fun to see the sequence of all this. And this is something important I'm going to tell you. I'll read this. AA celebrates. Let's see. I'll start here. This is at home in Akron. They feared the worst, but at last he walked in the door half an hour since he could. No, never mind that. Okay, the June 10th, 1935 is the date that, official date, we celebrate the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous, where Dr. Bob got sober. Me too sober. He never drank since then. However, it seems probable that the actual date of Dr. Bob's sobriety may be a week later than is generally supposed, June 17, 1935. The Journal of American Medical Association excerpt makes it clear that their Atlantic City convention started on June 10, 1935, not June 3rd as Dr. Bob's account reports. Here's a probable timeline. Sunday, June 9th, Dr. Bob starts drinking on the train, buys more booze upon arrival. Monday, June 10th, stays sober till evening. Tuesday, June 11th, checks out of hotel. Wednesday, June 12th, blackout begins. Thursday, June 13th, may have arrived back in Akron train depot. Friday, June 14th, picked up by nurse. Saturday, June 15th, drying out. Sunday, June 16th, another day of drying out. And Monday, June 17th, the last drink. So that probably, AA actually started at 7. That makes any difference one way or another, but we will still continue to celebrate the 10th no matter what. People get mixed up on things, and they can understand that. But it's important to know that. These are facts. I mean, to believe things, but facts are important. But here's what happened when AA began. I think I'll just read this to you. Dr. Bob came back from his drunk. Dr. Bob's taping off was augmented with a diet of tomato juice, sauerkraut, and Karo syrup, corn syrup, believed to supply both vitamins and energy, plus a little beer to quiet his nerves. Bob and Bill shared one of the upper bedrooms that was large enough for 2 beds. I was in there just recently. You take a tour through that house, you see it 2 beds, and you see this happening. It's just exciting to be in that very room where this happened. Because I wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here, this wouldn't have happened. During this crucial period, early Monday morning, the day of the scheduled operation, Bill was awakened by the statement, "I'm going through with this." Bill inquired, "Oh, you mean the operation?" Now, Dr. Bob had started an operation. He was a proctologist, and he kind of worked on people's rear ends. And you don't want to be shaky where somebody's rear end, the scalpel, see? And he said, "You mean the operation? Are you feel you're calm down as you can do it?" He said, he replied, he was going to perform the operation. Also, he's going to do what it takes to stay sober, get sober, and stay sober. They fell back asleep. So he made a decision right there that he's going to do this thing. The operation was scheduled a few hours hence. And you see the drama here, he's shaking. This guy could, cut this guy. The doctor was still shaking as Dr. Bob and Ann drove him to Akron City Hospital. But just before leaving the car, Bill gave him some beer and a goofball, a barbiturate, to hopefully calm his erratic nerves. A misguided scalpel could end the life of the patient as well as his career. Bill and Ann returned to 855 Ardmore and nervously listened for Dr. Phone's message of success or not. Hours passed, but finally came the good news they were praying for. But more hours and dire anticipation arose as newly sobered alcoholic had not returned. They feared the worst. But at last, he walked in the door, happily announcing he'd been simply busy mending fences. It means making amends to fellow doctors and associates. In other words, the program of action had finally begun. Up to that time, Dr. Bob simply had a fellowship, but now he had a program of action. Now, what goes on in AA is a fellowship, is one part of it. There's another part of AA which is not fellowship at all. It's a program of action, which is in 12 steps. Okay? He made those amends. That means he was doing the Oxford group precepts of what they thought he should do, and he had nerve enough to do it. In those days, it took a lot, because it wasn't in those days like today. If you're an alcoholic, you're just a low-down bum. You're not somebody sick or nothing. He could lose his practice, everything. But he was willing to go to any length, and he started working the program of action. So the program of action, he tried the fellowship alone, and it got him drunk. See? But the program of action and the fellowship together, he never drank again the rest of his life. Poor Dr. Bob still had that mental obsession for a couple of years, but still he didn't drink. And so he had a release in that respect. So this is the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they're sober, and they were going to have to find somebody to work with. Now, on the 28th day of June 1935, they went to Towns Hospital, and they called about having a drunk they could work with. And they said, it's kind of comical because he talked to one of the nurses. Everybody knew how Dr. Bob was drinking. He didn't think he did. They said, we want to find a drunk. We think we found a way to recover from alcoholism. We want to work with this drunk. So she said to Dr. Bob, well, Dr. Bob, have you tried it out yourself yet? And he said, well, yes, I have. And so he's close to 2 days sober, which goes to say you don't have to be sober a long time to do 12-step work. And so here he goes. He goes to Towns, not Towns Hospital, Akron City Hospital, and they meet this guy here, Bill Dotson, which is AA number 3, etc. They called his wife Henrietta first, and she said, well, I don't think you can help him, but you try. And he was a bad case. He'd been in the hospital 6 times the last 4 weeks or something like that, some terrible time. Just in and out of the hospital all the time. He beat up some of the nurses. They had him strapped down to bed at one time. And he was a lawyer, and he was a politician, a wonderful person when he's sober. He just went all haywire when he drank. And so they talked to him. And he said, oh, you folks can't help me. I'm a goner. I'm just too, I can't, I drink before I get home when I leave the hospital. I'm no good. They said, well, that might be true, but you can help us stay sober. We need someone to work with. He said, well, I guess it won't hurt anything. You go ahead and do what you want to do. And he did it. They talked, and indeed they stayed sober another day. They came back again. His wife was there. Her name was Henrietta, like Henrietta Dotson. And he said, there they are. They're the ones that know the answer. They know the answer. And they talk of him some more. And the conversation kept on. They probably described all they had in those days. They didn't have a 6-step program as it was later on. Or like they didn't have an AA program. AA wasn't going to take place to the big book until a long time later. But that part of it. But they told in the Oxford group, they probably told them the 4 tenets. I mean, the 4 absolutes. The way to remember the 4 absolutes is like spell HULP, honesty, unselfishness, love, and purity. You've got to remember that. And they taught him these things. He could see that made sense. And also the different tenets that Bill had accepted of the Oxford group. If you want to know what they are, I'd like to read them to you. So on page XVI of all the editions of the big book, except for the first one. And this is what it says. This is what probably the message they took to him. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, this is Bill Wilson, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, a necessity, and the belief in and dependence upon God. So that's what he was taught. This is what made him get sober. Before I tell the rest of the story, I want to jump ahead because you might find this interesting. Those who've got 4th edition books go to page 263, and the ones who have 3rd edition books go to page 292. And if you want to follow me along, or you just listen, it'd be just fine, of course. Here is Dr. Bob a couple years later working with Earl Treat when they had a 6-step program. They didn't have a 6-step. You can see how these 4 tenets of the Oxford group fit into what's here. Wednesday in Dr. Bob's afternoon off, he had me down to the office. We spent 3 or 4 hours formally going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. Get that? 3 or 4 hours. Not 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 hours. Okay? The 6 steps were complete deflation, dependence and guidance from a higher power, moral inventory, confession, restitution, continue to work with other alcoholics. Dr. Bob read me through all these steps. At the moral inventory, I brought up with my bad personality traits or character defects such as selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentments. We went over these at great length, and then he finally asked me if I wanted to have the defects of character removed. I said yes, and we both met to death and prayed. Each of us asking to have these defects taken away. The picture is still vivid. If I live to be 100, it will always stand out in my mind. It was very impressive, and I wish every AA could have this benefit of this type of sponsorship today. This guy's name is Earl Treat, and he started AA in Chicago a few years later after that. So that's an interesting thing. But how the tenets, I'm trying to point a picture to you, how the tenets of the Oxford group, the first century Christian fellowship, comes into the Alcoholics Anonymous, making up our 12 steps. The beginning of it. Our 6th step, eventually, I will talk about later, morphed into 12 steps, you probably know, but right at that time, when Bill Dodge was here, there's only the Oxford group, that's all he had. On the 4th of July, 6 days later, maybe 7 days, whatever it was, he marched out of the hospital, a free man, never to drink again. He goes back to being a lawyer and a politician. He was a wonderful person, did a lot of 12-step work and so on like that, you call it. But he would never call it 12-step. He was not very enthused when a few years later he wrote this book. He didn't care about it. He liked the Oxford. That's how he got sober. So he didn't like it. He didn't like the 12 steps. And you know, if you read the first printing, you read this book here, the first printing of the first edition of the big book, Bill Dodson's not in here. It's kind of interesting, because he didn't want his story in there. He didn't believe in this too much. I understand. So, but you get the second edition, 1955, there were 16 prints this, that's all we were done with. He dies in 1954. So in 1955, here comes the second edition up, and they had a tape of him talking about his life, you know. So they typed that up, and they stuck it in the second edition. So he got the second edition not even knowing about it. I don't know what to think about that, but that's what they did. There's the story of Bill Dodson, how he got started. Number 3, probably that was the beginning of our first real movement into, actually a group. I don't know if you call just Bill and Doctor. Some people call it just Bill and Bob a group, or it depends how you look at it. But then they had 3. They had a group. There's a guy named Eddie. He never did get sober very good, but later on I think he did, but for years he didn't. And Eddie was with them too, and part of that. And he'd get drunk on and off. He was a young guy. He was mean when he got drunk. There's a story about Eddie that you could read in Dr. Bob, the good old timers. Dr. Bob was at work, at home with Ann. Eddie was there. They took drunks in their house. This is the first halfway house that ever happened in the world of Alcoholics Anonymous. At Dr. Bob's house, 855 Ardmore. And he got drunk, came in, and almost picked up a butcher knife, and he had Ann by the hair and going to cut her throat with a butcher knife. And she talks him out of it. And she calls Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob comes home. They sedated him, put him to bed or whatever. And Dr. Bob, with typical humor, you know, they had tuna fish for lunch that day. He said, you know, it must have been the tuna fish. Dr. Bob's humor. But there's another guy named Ernie who got sober at that time. There's 7 months. He was a story in the big book, I guess. Anyway, he was around it again. But that's all sober. He was sober in and out. Not too much was going on too good. But what were they doing in that day? Henrietta, they were all Oxford group at that time. They would go to T. Henry Williams' house on Wednesdays. There's a picture of it here. And that's T. Henry Williams' wife Clarice. And they'd have Oxford group meetings. They'd do sharing with each other where they'd been sinful and this and that and the other. And that's how they did. And maybe that's the beginning of our discussion meetings in AA, but they did all that. And they'd wake up in the morning, they'd have quiet meditation. Now, people started living with Bill and Bill Wilson moved in with Dr. Bob. I forgot to tell you that. For that whole summer of 1935. Because he was still getting money from New York from the Beard Company up there for his play with that machine company. But it didn't work out anyway, but he was still obligated to stay there. He stayed there till later August. So the time they wake up in the morning, they do meditation, a quiet time. And they read the Holy Bible, and they read mostly Corinthians 3, I think it was, and James, and Sermon on the Mount out of the Bible. These are the main things. This is what they were doing. There was somebody said, you can't talk about religion. Right? Well, this is what they did. Don't make it religion or not. That's what they did. They did it. Don't mean they didn't do it because you don't like it. They did it. And so that's this where. And matter of fact, James is one of it works. It really does. That's one of Dr. Bob's, Bill Wilson's cliches he put in a big book on page 88. I mean, this has definitely ought to do with our 12 steps. I'll get into that a little bit more later on. But they talk to each other. They had a fellowship. They talk to each other. They talk to 3 o'clock in the morning at times. They just talk all the time. They just all visit each other. They had a real fellowship. This is where the program of action and the fellowship's intertwined. You know, they're not having a fellowship talking about the ball game. And I go to meetings in my hometown, meetings all over with. A lot of people just go home. But the ones that do hang around, they're talking about workplaces, the ball game, or something like that. I come to AA to talk about AA. I'm going to talk about the steps. I want the tradition. I'm going to talk about the next convention. I'm going to talk about, and I've got no one to talk to. Sadly, I go to this clubhouse, and it's almost like a taboo subject to talk about the steps. You know, you're out of place. Well, it wasn't there for them. They talked about the program of action. They talked about what was getting sober. They talked about God. They talked about religion. Talked about everything. Because they were very serious people. Yeah. We pay a price in AA a lot of times, I think, you know. And I won't get too much into that because it's a preaching, but nonetheless, we pay a price, and if we lose that spirit that they had, we lose a lot. We talked about responsibility last night, and what I brought up about responsibility was this. I think my major responsibility is to continue the talk that Bill Wilson had with Dr. Bob Smith on May 11th, 1930, May 12th, Mother's Day, to continue that conversation. And that's what I come to AA for. I don't come to AA to have good times and just feel good. So there's nothing wrong with it, and I do talk about stuff once in a while, of course, but nonetheless, I think there's something very serious. We lose the spirit of AA like they had in those days. And that went on for many years. That spirit grew and grew. A newcomer comes to our AA meetings, and if that spirit is not there, that gravity that pulls him in, that magnetic pull, that he doesn't understand, you can't talk about because it's down your deep. A lot of times he goes back to the bar room because he doesn't have that feeling. I think it's my duty to try to maintain that spirit of Alcoholics Anonymous that they had during those early days. Not just those early days, early years go on. I'm making a point there about the history, how the history is very prevalent to what we're doing today. It's relevant to what we're doing today. We need very much to keep the spirit going, and we do a lot of places. I went to one of our Fourth Dimension meetings about 2 weeks ago, Thursday night. Ron P. has a meeting over here in Fairborn. And 20 minutes afterward, there were about 35 people there, and out in the parking lot. The meeting's over 20 minutes, and there's still about 15 people talking. And an hour later, there were still 10 of us out there talking about, and we're talking about the big book about Program of Action Alcoholics Anonymous. I was just in heaven. You know, it's a wonderful thing. There are places like that. I like that. I grew up in California. That's what we talked about there. We go to restaurants to talk about the Program of Action. It's exciting. How to help John or Mary, maybe how to do it. But, so that's what I'm getting to that. And I want to point that I'm just not trying to get off the subject here. I'm trying to draw the importance of history, what it has to do with what's happening now. What they were doing then was something wonderful. Because we grew We had 5 people sober in 35. We had 15 sober there into 1936. We had 40 people sober then to 37. The next year we had 40 people sober. The next year we had 100 people sober when they wrote the big book. The next year we had 2,000 sober, and that jumped to 8,000 in 1 year. And 15 years after Alcoholics Anonymous started, we had almost 100,000 people who could not drink, could almost not drink. What a miracle that is, see? That was a spirit under that. Alcoholic is one drunk talking to another drunk from the heart. Not knowledge, not knowing a lot about anything. This book is written for some drunk crawling out of the gutter, you know. Anybody crawl out of the gutter? Right? Out of the ditch, I guess it was, anyway. And they can understand this, see. Simple book. There's nothing complicated about this at all. It's meant to be very, very simple. It could be complicated, but they didn't make it that way. So where are we at in history? Bill is there. He's sober. Dr. Bob's sober. Bill Dotson's sober. And Ernie Garbus is sober on and off. Ernie Garbus, I might not get it later on, but he thought he had married Sue. That was Dr. Bob's adopted daughter. He never liked Ernie because that's how he's a phony. He probably was. He stayed drunk most of his life. A lot of terrible things happened with that marriage. But let's go. Bill goes back to New York. The last of August, 1935. Bill goes back to New York, leaving Akron as it was. 2 people sober, 1 on and off. Not much going on. So he goes back there. He goes to Towns Hospital this time, which is a little classier place than where he failed so many times down at the Mission. And he meets this guy here, Hank Parkhurst. Hank Parkhurst is a near atheist. He don't like this God stuff at all. It's funny how God put that to be the first person in New York that he worked with and got sober. Amazing. Yeah. And he was in the Towns Hospital. And so he's sober. And then the very next person, the very next month, probably in November, this is October, I think this is probably November, it's not clear, is Fitz Mayo, John Henry Fitzborough Mayo. And see, these are all mover and shaker people. This guy here, we read about the employer, to the employer. He wrote in the big book, you read To the Employer in the big book? He wrote that, or it's ghostwritten. But anyway, he hired and fired like 30,000 people. He fired a lot of people for being drunk and all that. And one of them committed suicide one time he fired and so on. And so he's a mover and shaker guy. This guy here's a religious guy. But I want to stop right here and point out something else to us. Let us think over what we've gone through this day. The hand of God, seemingly, or some kind of higher power, is making this thing work. First of all, we have William James, the father of modern psychology. What an interesting title. Then we have Dr. Carl Jung. Everybody knew who Dr. Carl Jung was back then. Very, very important person. And then who's the other guy? A millionaire guy, Roland Hazard, multi-million guy. And then he makes it Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher ain't hay. I mean, his father played golf with the President of the United States, and he was well known, very, very wealthy, made wheels for the railroads, and had a big factory, and so Ebby, and then Bill Wilson gets in the game, and what a mover and shaker he was. He was just exactly the right kind of person to make AA go. Everybody couldn't do like Bill Wilson did. Egomaniac like he was, he'd just go get her and die, plus everything else. And he was a wonderful person. All these things come together. Then we get into Akron where we are now. Well, I haven't told you this yet, but how the Oxford group got to Akron to start with, because this was going to happen unless the Oxford group is in Akron. A couple of years before Bill got there, the Firestones, Harvey Firestone, had a drunken son named Bud Firestone. And a guy named Jim Newton, who was an Oxford group member, worked with him and fixed him off of his alcoholism. And said somehow they had the Firestones had this plant. They set him up to be Jim Newton to be vice president of a young guy to be president of Firestone there in Akron. And so they so let's take the Akron group here at the Mayflower Hotel, which they did, had a big convention that started AA in Akron. That's where T. Henry Williams and then had their meeting on Wednesday night. So this all happened. What's that? A real mover and shaker, Harvey Firestone. What bigger would you want, you know? And then the Cyberlands, millionaires. I mean, there it is again. It's people, movers and shakers people. This didn't just happen haphazardly. You could see the hand or something really putting this thing together like a puzzle. You want it to happen. And that has to do with the title of the book I wrote, A Pre-AA History, a study of syncretic events between the years 26 and 35, which culminated into the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so we had these movers and shakers all put together. And you put this together, it's hard to deny that this just happened because it just fell in that way. No. Can't prove any of it, naturally, but it just makes sense. I always like to point that out when I talk about these things. Well, here's Bill in New York. He's gone to Oxford Group, 1935, 1936. He has all these people coming to his house. Matter of fact, Lois is working. Leos, she'd worked at Macy's for a long time, but she moved to Leos's because it was close for him. And Ebby moves in with Bill at 182 Clinton Street. I went there one time to take a picture of it just for fun. It's near the Brooklyn Bridge. It's something to do if you ever get to New York. It's worthwhile to take that trip and see that. You can't go in or nothing, but I mean, you just see it from a distance and take a picture of it. And it's sold recently like $1.5 million. So it's sort of like it's like a New York house. They're connected onto each other and just go straight up. There's one below and three above, I think it was, or something like that. And so I think the drunks stayed down in the basement place and they lived upstairs like that. And they had a servants on the top floor. I think it was something like that. I forget how it was. They had servants. Don't forget. These are not poor people. And so they're having all these drunks there. And there's adventures happening as the drunks live there. One drunk found a bottle of syrup, maple syrup. Of course, he thought it was whiskey and drank it. Another guy got caught downstairs. He climbed in. He's locked out of the house. He climbed the basement and fell into the coal bin. They had coal bins back in the day. He all felt dirty in the head. And I think he was naked or something like that. And Lois had to cover him up to get him upstairs and stuff like that. And all these adventures happened. They'd argue and they'd fight about different things. Some were staying sober, and not a lot. And then one really sad thing happened. I don't know. I think this would be 37 or something. One fellow, Bill and Lois were gone, and this one guy, he was a lawyer, I think, too, but he got Lois's fur coat and sold it for money to get drunk on it. And felt so guilty that when they came home, they found him there with his head in the oven, and the gas was turned on. He was dead. He committed suicide. So the sad things that happened. There are a lot of battles. But the point is that they kept right on going like a steamroller. They didn't stop. They had nothing to stop them. Bill's personality, he had the kind of person, I'll show him all. He always felt that way. Thank God he did, How many people would have given up at that point, Death, everything else happened. But they're going on. They're going to the Oxford Group. They're going to Stewart's Restaurant afterward. But they're not getting too long, well too long. Finally, Bill starts a meeting on Tuesday night at his house at 182 Clinton Street. And the Oxford Groups aren't liking that very much. You're not being maximum. The Oxford Groups don't want to work with a bunch of drunks. They want to change the whole world. They want to change everything. And so you're not being maximum, Bill. And it turns out eventually he left the Oxford Group. It was kind of both ways. And Bill didn't like the four absolutes. He liked the four ideas behind the absolutes, but absolute is too much for any alcoholic. Absolutely honest, absolutely pure, absolutely this, absolutely that. Alcoholic can't be absolute. So he didn't like that anyway. A lot of things he didn't like, and they didn't like him either, because he was not being maximum. He wasn't out trying to change the world. He was trying to change these alcoholics. They didn't like him having that meeting at his house, so he finally left there. So at that point, everything exclusive was there at his house. Bill finally decided, well, maybe it's time to make some money. And he starts looking for jobs. He went to Detroit. And on that trip, he comes down to Akron, Ohio, and has a conference with Dr. Bob. And they realize, my goodness, we got, there's 40 people sober. 40 people. And half of them more than a year. That was big back then. My goodness. We got something here really wonderful. We should have, Bill thinks big, you know. He said we should have a hospital for drunks. And we should have an employment agency for these drunks. And we should have people out carrying the message, messengers out carrying the message all around. And maybe we can have a book or something like that about it, you know. And they didn't like that. I was too big shot for people in Akron. They said, well, Bill, maybe. But, well, why don't you go back to New York and raise the money? You know all those rich people. So Bill said, yeah. So he goes back to New York, talks to his friends. They thought, well, the Salvation Army is probably more important to give our money to than some bunch of drunks. And what about the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts? They wouldn't know. They said they didn't get a penny out of it. He didn't know what to do. He was very despondent. Bill was always having depression. He told his brother-in-law, very interesting story here. Brother-in-law, Leonard Strong, Lois's brother. He was a doctor. And he said, you know, you do need money. I have an idea. Now this comes from tapes I've heard. I knew, other people tell the story differently, but he said, I knew a girl I went to school with, and I heard she worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. Maybe I could get a hold of her. And somehow she got a hold of this guy here, William Richardson, and it all turned out. And lo and behold, Bill was invited to come to the Rockefeller office. And he goes way up in the elevator, gets up there, went way up high, and Mr. Rockefeller wasn't there, but he talked to this fellow here, and maybe one other, maybe I think just him. And so he talked to him, and he said, well, we'll try to set up a luncheon for you. And we think it's a good idea, and I think we could get this across. So Bill is sitting there, and he's sitting in this chair. He writes this. He said, there I am, sitting in a chair just recently vacated by John D. Rockefeller Jr. Said, boy, he's getting someplace. He's happy now. He's going to get some money to do all these things. He sees hospitals coming up and all kind of money. Of course, knowing Bill, he's taking a lot of money in his pocket along with it. What the heck? But I mean, that he's got big ideas. See, we need Bill Wilson. We need somebody like him to make AA work. So he goes to luncheon. They have a luncheon, and at this luncheon, let's see, this is a picture of these two non-alcoholic people that helped us out so much. Okay, here comes a luncheon with the Rockefeller Associates. Rockefeller's got his associates with him. Okay, Bill Wilson's there, Dr. Silkworth is there, a few members from New York and Akron. I think Dr. Bob was there. Yeah, Dr. Bob was there. The backers are moved and impressed by the fellowship's work. And boy, Bill's thinking all this money's coming in, man. These people are wealthy. And Rockefeller's got, and if you know anything about the Rockefellers, they reached a point where they had to give money away. They wanted to get a good name in the world, and a lot of people were mad at the old man Rockefeller, but they were giving money away all over the place, but it had to be wisely spent. And, however, after it's pointed out that money could spoil the group's purpose. The meeting reaps welcome enthusiasm, moral funds, but no funds. Mr. Albert Scott says this, wouldn't money spoil this thing? Oh, Bill must have really been disappointed. All that going on. He goes home, and he had to feel awful bad about that. But what happened is, they sent a guy, Frank Amos. Anyway, here's a picture of Rockefeller. And Rockefeller Jr. And so Frank Amos was an associate, had to do with the funds, and they sent him in February of 1935 down to Akron. And he went to tea in the Williams house, and he went to the meetings they had there. He talked to these 40 alcoholics that were sober. And he comes back with an absolutely glowing report. Why, this is wonderful. This is first century Christianity. These people are doing wonderful. They're staying sober. And he recommended that they be given $50,000. See? $50,000 in those days. That would be, it'd be $800,000 a day, let's say, close to $1 million. That would be a down payment for a hospital, this and that and the other. All things went in. Bill must have felt great about that. And Mr. Rockefeller hears about it, and he makes a decision. And Bill Wilson, he took a decision that saved Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, indeed, too much money would ruin this thing. So instead of giving the $50,000, he gave him $5,000, which is $80,000 a day, which was enough to pay off the interest, pay off Dr. Bob's house, and give them $30 a week to live on, which is several $100s a week to live on, and so on like that. So this is where they can start writing the book. Well, with that low amount of money, the hospital's out. The idea of having employment agencies out. There's one idea left. It was a book. It would be the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It turns out to be. They didn't know what they're going to call it. So Bill starts writing that in somewhere about March or April 1938. He wrote it backwards. He wrote Bill's story, chapter number 2, and There Is a Solution, chapter number 1. Anyway, this is not necessarily going to be, he didn't know what kind of book it was going to be, but he writes this out in quite a few pages. I got it at home. I didn't bring it with me. I probably should have. But, so he takes it, so he's got this typed out and done over and again and again. But this is to send out to people to get money off of people so they get more money. They could see he's going to write a book. Indeed, some people did offer him some money. One guy offered $1,500, but they'd have to own the book if they did, or be a partner in it. And they decided, no, it's got to belong to us ourselves. We can't do it. Dr. Silkworth wrote some this is the beginning of the big book being written in July of 1938. Dr. Silkworth wrote some stuff for them. And then after that comes along Jim Scott. He's an author, and he's a newspaper guy, actually. He helps to write stories. So he writes all these Akron people write their stories. He helps them write their stories. They got a lot of stories. And this is like July, August, September, October, November, into December, and Bill's beginning to write this book. And he's coming along, and I want to show you what it kind of looks like. This is handwritten. He'd sit in bed. Bill would never stand up when he could sit down. He would never sit down when he could lay down, says Lois. So he'd lay on his back writing this stuff on a yellow pad. Then he takes his office over in New Jersey, and Ruthie Hawk, who was his secretary at the time, would type it up like that. And sometimes he would just dictate and she'd type and stuff like that. That was the beginning of her book. And so eventually by December, the stories were kind of in and everything. And see, I'm going to show you something here. I want you all to come after when the break time comes, and which will be not too long. I'm going to walk around and just show you what happened. He'd lay in bed. He got to chapter 5, and they had 6 steps at that time. We talked about those before. He said, there's too many loopholes there. These drunks are getting drunk. We got to close it up. We got to make more. So he starts writing. He prays to God. I think this is important. When I've never taken anybody through the steps. I take a lot of people through the steps, but I never have them do without doing what I call spontaneous writing or automatic writing. That means you pray to God and just write down. I won't get into it. It's a little too complicated to talk about right now, but that's the way he did that. This comes from the Oxford group. Copernicus did it 500 years ago, as a matter of fact. People, it's not old to pray to God and write down what God told you. It's not. But that's what he did. God, please help me, he says. And all at once, this is important, 6 steps turned into 12 steps in 20 minutes. Boop, like that. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And so he had 12 steps. He showed it to the people there at his house, and they threw a fit. Well, how would you feel if somebody come back tomorrow and say, we got 24 steps now? Well, anyway, but I'm going to walk around just to show you people, and I'd like to look at it in detail. It takes weeks. This is a wonderful book. It's called the book that started it all. It's out of Hazelden, for $60. It's a gift to me. I don't have to, but, actually it's, Amazon for around $30. So good buy. And, but I'm going to show you what happened. He wrote that, and they got a lot of disapproval. They printed 400 mimeograph copies, sent to people, see people's ideas, and they came back. People had a lot of ideas about changes. A guy named Dr. Howard and several others had to do with changing this stuff here. So, but I want to show you here how many changes were made. Bill Wilson supposedly wrote the big book, but other people have a lot to do with it. Just look at this. He doesn't look at that. Changes made. All scratched out. 2 groupings. There's 2 groupings. What 2 grouping means? You too much like the office. You need to say, wait a minute, he also was Jim Burwell, and he had 8 on one side. I think that's gone out real fast. They had to put more guy in. That's the changes. The same Bill wrote the big book himself. It's kind of a mistake. There's more to it than that. God did other people to help. Bill Wilson had the idea. He said that thou must under pain of drunkenness, if you get drunk, you got to do that and give compassion. And they said, oh, Bill, you can't tell an alcoholic that's what's going on like that. You can't do that. Instead of saying, this is what you must do, this is what we did. And today, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I say, is not a book of prescription. What you have to do is a book of description about what they did. It says, must, 72 times for 164 days, and that must be, you want to follow the path they took, then you must do these things. And that gives a different light to big book. Another big book numbers, you're trying to tell me how to work. No, I'm not telling you, I'm telling you what they did. You understand it, they're trying to preach. I'm not. I think what page 42 here, number 3, page 43, and an interesting thing there, to show you how radically things have changed. Most of us know that on page 86 of the big book, it talks about what we do before we go to bed at night. We've been angry and this and that and the other, and different things, you know. Well, that was what Bill wrote. Bill wrote for that sentence, to show you how things changed so dramatically, other than just what I just told you about. You'll recognize this when I read it to you, those of you in the big book. It says here, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. We're resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid. Well, what Bill wrote was not that at all. And here he wrote, when we wake in the morning, we review our day before, where we're resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid. They said, oh no, you can't put that, get that too groupy. You can't get it out of there. So what they did, they changed it from in the morning, like he wrote, and put it at night. That's why it says that. And I spent many years trying to explain why Bill put go to night first, then day, then the morning, then the day. Why? Well, that's nonsense. It's just that they changed it. It wasn't Bill's idea at all. But it's interesting how that the sway a lot of people had to do with writing this book. And I think it comes from the powers above that this would have happened. Because if Bill would have had his way like that, the big book would never have sold. the phrase God as we understand him would not have been in there, see? That comes from Jim Burwell. People like that. So we're lucky. So I keep on with it. When I'd like to give a history talk, I keep on about how that there's more to it than just Bill Wilson wrote something, worked wonderful and everything like that. So the big book was finished and printed. And let's see if I got some more information here for you. I typed in little stuff and then I don't even read it. I'll read some of this to you here. I'll repeat a little bit. 1939, nearly 100 people saw it. Most people think it's 86 actually. The drafted book and stories were completed. 400 copies were distributed for evaluation. Joe Warden was credited with getting the New York Fellowship to favor the name Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, he was a mental patient, had a lot of money. They had him in because might get a big donation out of him. And he was sitting in the back of the room, so goes the story, and he's saying one of the names that floated around was Alcoholics Anonymous, but they weren't in favor of it. They had another thing. But he sat in the back of the room and said, Anonymous Alcoholic, Anonymous Alcoholic, Anonymous Alcoholic, Anonymous. And he said, well, that's what we should call it. And so they called it Alcoholics Anonymous. So goes the story. Who knows how true it is? But this speaker out of Texas said that. Major change produced by Dr. Howard, tone down the mess to what we did. The big book tenor changed from a prescription to a description. This is what we did, in other words. Editor Tom Uzel from Collier's magazine was paid $380, multiply it by 20 probably, to edit the manuscript. He shortened it dramatically. Ray Campbell, an artist concept, and I had that, I thought. Here down. I don't have it. I had the cover somewhere. Anyway, he did but he made this cover here, and he had a man walking cover, which is first, but this was they decided this one here, called the circus cover. He's the one that did that. April 10th, the big book is published, not 5,000 copies like you hear, but it's 4,730 copies. And at this time, here Bill and Lois had to vacate their home at 182 Clinton Street, and they were homeless. They were broke and homeless. These rich people did all their lives, wealthy, and now they're completely broke, sober, and nowhere to live. One time they're sitting crying on the steps of the Grand Central Station. When are they going to sleep next? But they stayed at Hank Parkhurst's house, and then many other alcoholics for the next 2 years allowed them to stay in their little residences on the couch or somewhere like that. And Lois kept on working at the department store. There wasn't enough money to go around. They barely could make it. Eventually, in 1941, a clubhouse came along, and they lived there and finally got their own home. But the last thing I want to tell before we'll take a little short break here. February 8th, things are not doing so hot. Big book's not selling. Well, it's just the big book's not quite a year past yet. They're not making any money on the big book. Rockefeller's keeping an eye on what's going. This is where we can hand it to Don D. Rockefeller Jr. He kept track of what was going on. He knew it wasn't going so good. So he himself invited a dinner. And February 8th, John Rockefeller held a dinner for AA at the Union League Club in New York City. 75 out of the 400 invited guests attended. Nelson Rockefeller hosted attendance of his ill father. The dinner produced much favorable national publicity and raised $2,200, be $36,000 a day from the attendees and $1,000 from Rockefeller. And the dinner guests contributed about $3,000 a year up to 1945 when they were received donations as well as income from sales of the big book. Asked to stop. See, AA said, don't send us any more. We got too much. We don't want your money anymore. And the Alcoholics Foundation, from this dinner, came an influx of good publicity worldwide, and they paid Rockefeller back every penny of that money. We finally paid him back, so we didn't want to own nothing. That's a wonderful thing about it. It showed our integrity that we have. And things started going better financially. The first clubhouse It was rented at 334.5 West 24th Street in New York City for $100 a month, $1,640 a day. It was formerly the Illustrators Club. And then things started happening out in Texas. We started growing and growing and growing. And as I mentioned before, we really grew fast. And so we've got things going pretty well. Akron's going well. Cleveland's going well. So one thing that made things grow, Hank P. got drunk. Hank Parkhurst got drunk, and he died drunk not too long after that. And they had a lot of arguments, too much to get into here. But here's one of the things that helped, several things that helped us grow so fast. We grow like 1,000,000 miles an hour. The Cleveland Indians baseball star, Rollie Hensley had his anonymity broken. He caught for Bobby Feller for the Cleveland Indians in 1940 World Series. And he was a very famous person, but he kept getting drunk all the time, and his name would get in the paper. But he joined AA, and he had a year's sobriety and told everybody about it, and a lot of people came to AA because of that. And he did later a personal appearance in 42 and 43, caused an influx of new members. And by 1941, we had 2,000 members. And Jack Alexander, Saturday Evening Post article was published March 1st, 1941. And that one year, we jumped all the way from 2,000 members to 8,000 members. 4 times in 1 year. Whew, wow. And reprints the article became a favorite pamphlet, as it remains today. And then in 1941, it says over 6,000 inquiries were sent to New York office because of this article. And that was the end of the first printing, and the second printing was 1955. That's what I have, because that's when I came in. Because I came in 75, but the second edition was still in print at that time. That's why my first one was one of those. And here's something interesting. Title page text changed from 100 men to more than 2. Here's a title, and we'll take a break as soon as I show you this part here, which I think is important. It says here, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. And that's the first printing. And the next printing came out 2 years later, and some of the ladies, they're not going to like that. So now it says men and women. But then the next one say how more than 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, so on like that as time went on. Now it says many thousand have recovered. But more important than that even, I'd like to point out, you see this in italics, Astoria? Well, this is italic. That means it's important. It's important because this is a textbook. It's also a storybook. This is a text storybook. It's not a thou must. It's out of pain and drunkenness. It's a storybook because it's what we did. And I think it's this book. Once again, this book is a description rather than a prescription. Bill Wilson wouldn't have had it that way, but the editors did. So that will have a short break if you don't mind, and come back and we'll close at 4:30. Okay, let's jump ahead to Cleveland, Ohio, and Akron. Here's one of my heroes in AA, is Clarence Snyder. And pass this around. Dr. Bob was his sponsor. Clarence got sober on the 11th day of February 1938. If you get a chance to listen to any Clarence Snyder leads, it's worthwhile listening to. He's just a wonderful speaker, very enthusiastic, and if it wouldn't have been for his antagonistic attitude toward Bill Wilson, he might have been tri-founder number 3, says Nell Wing, Bill's secretary. But he's very outspoken. He didn't care much for traditions, didn't care much for a lot of things, but he helped a lot of people and really helped AA get started. If you hear his lead, he, at one point of his, he was a smart guy, he was a banker at times, and show what kind of people we get in AA. But nonetheless, at one time, his job was limited to, in New York, people who had trucks back in those days, back in the 30s, would have somebody watch the trucks, they wouldn't get stolen. And you had to watch the trucks, and this time he'd make enough money that he'd get paint thinner and pour it through bread and drink that. That's the kind of a drunkard he was. I guess it's one step lower than Skid Row almost. I don't know. But that's how bad he got. He comes back to Akron, Ohio, back to Cleveland, his hometown. His wife doesn't, they're all trying to get rid of him. They can't figure out how to get rid of him. And so they thought, well, they heard about this doctor down there in Akron, Ohio, Dr. Bob Smith, that fixing these drunks. So they sent him down there to work. And this time he'd been off a terrible drunk, very sick, imaginary things. And I know when I got sober, I was full of imaginary things. I mean, people would die, and I think I should have tapped the table 3 times, they wouldn't have died. I thought I was in control of things. I was nutty as a fruitcake when I got in AA. And he met Dr. Bob, and he must have been kind of like I was, because there was a murderer up in Cleveland. He saw his picture in a paid newspaper, and the guy had some resemblance to Dr. Bob Smith. And when he met Dr. Bob, in his mind, well, this is that murderer up there. He's going to murder me. That's the way he was thinking. I mean, this just to give you an idea of Clarence's mind, and maybe some of our minds when we first got sober and still hallucinating and all these kind of things. So he went to Dr. Bob's hospital, and he was sat there through it. And these times in AA, people would come to you. AAs would come to you. Maybe they were in a gutter 3 or 4 months ago, but they'd always be wearing a suit, tie, maybe a Homburg, nicely dressed, and 2 at a time. And they'd talk to you about AA. They wouldn't tell you how they got sober. They just said they got sober. And it wasn't AA then. It was an Oxford group, 1938. Because we weren't AA actually until the Big Book in 39. But they told how that, and he'd be very impressed. They stayed sober. And it was about the 5th or 6th day. And that's all he knew. And Dr. Bob came in and said, "Young fella, you ready to get out of here?" And he said, Dr. Bob always called me young fella. I was 35 years old, and he lived the way I told you he lived. He said, I guess I had enough. But 35 years old was a young fella back in those days, just the idea of what things were like. And he said, yeah, he wants to get out and go on. And he said, you believe in God? What's that got to do with it? It's got everything to do with it. Well, I guess I do. No, you do or you don't? Yes, I do. You know how to pray? No. Get on your knees. No. Get on my knees. Now, Dr. Bob's a proctologist. He's got these long fingers, he says. And he's going to his gowns to open the back, you know, and he's scared to death what's going to happen. But he got down there, and you know how to pray? No, I guess you don't. You just repeat after me. So he repeated after me, after what Dr. Bob said. And only then was he allowed to go to T. Henry Williams' house and get sober with the rest of the people, the nameless bunch of drunks that they had in that day. He did that. And he got sober and stayed sober. Never drank again. It didn't take him very long. He's out 12-stepping all over the place. He'd go to bars and pull people off the bar. He'd do all kinds of things, just things we don't do today, but that's the way he was. This one lady, he tells in one of his talks, you just gotta hear his tapes when you get a chance. He made lots of them. He was this drunk lady. He was 12-stepping her, and she was in a restaurant, a spaghetti joint, where they had beer, I guess, and everything. But anyway, she was in there. She was drunk, and the waiter came over, and she threw spaghetti all over the waiter. Of course, they called the police, and they took her to jail. And guess who else they took to jail? They took Clarence to jail too. They were with her. So that's some of the things that happened to him. And he'd go to places like, in those days, people would take over vacant houses. There'd be a bunch of drunks laying on the floor. This one guy was laying there, he couldn't even move. He was so bad off. And somehow, he got the guy's name, and this is the length he would go to. And he took off, and he went out to this guy's mother, and lived some distance away, and got $50 off of her somewhere, or whatever amount it was, to go to town, to go to a hospital down in Akron City Hospital. Dr. Bob could work on them. Cost a little bit of money to go to them. I don't know what they were. Anyway, she had money hidden in the mattress. He takes this money, gets this drunk off the floor, gets to Dr. Bob's house. Just kind of stories like that. They go to any length. He was a real 12-stepper. I mean, stuff like that. All his life he 12-stepped. He would take people to the steps in 2 days. And at the end of his life, he went down to Florida, somewhere in the northern part of Florida. I can't think right now. Somebody might know. Where do they live in Florida? Anybody know? No, okay. Don't make any difference. Anyway. But he'd be there, and he'd take people, not so much newcomers to the steps, people who'd been around for a long time to the steps. And this one guy came all the way from London over to help. He said, well, may I help you? He said, what length are you willing to go to get sober? And the guy kind of stammered around. He said, well, you can get right back to that plane and go back to London, because I can't work with you. You're not willing to go to any length. If you didn't say that, he wouldn't work with you. Dr. Bob was that way, too. He said, be careful. People aren't ready to go. They can get you drunk. Because everybody's new back in those days, so they were scared of newcomers. They were scared to death. I heard Norman Norman talk. He got sober in 1939. I heard him give this talk at 1978 at Akron. I was just over 3 years, but I heard him talk there. And he said that he came into AA. He tried to borrow a nickel off of somebody. He said, you get out of here, you bum. You don't ever come back. They kicked him out. You're not in a mooch. And he went home. He said, I'm going to get a gun. I'm going to kill every one of them. No. I'm going to kill their wives too, their whole family. I'm going to kill them all. No. I'm going to get sober and show them. He never drank again. But that's the way they were in those days. They didn't mess around. I mean, they were scared. They're actually scared because they figured that if I weren't serious and get drunk, and I think that's just the way they were. Everything's new back in those days. Well, because Clarence, the big book came out the 10th day of April, 1939. 1 month later, the 11th day, something dramatic happened. Now, Clarence got a job for the Ford Motor Company selling cars. He's such a good Ford salesman, they gave him 2 Fords to use. He had two cars. And he'd take these cars, and he'd take drunks out of Cleveland, take them 30 miles down the road to Akron, to T. Henry Williams' house on a Wednesday night, and they were doing well, and they were getting help. Well, the priest up there said to the drunks, he said, you can't go down with those Protestants and tell all. You're supposed to tell the priest. He said, you'll be excommunicated, you keep going. And so they couldn't go anymore. And Clarence went down and told his sponsor, Dr. Bob Smith, he said, Dr. Bob, we're going to have to change things about it. He said, Dr. Bob says, tough, we can't change what the Oxford Group does. And he told his sponsor, he said, I'll show you what's tough. I'm going to go up tomorrow night, next Thursday night, on the 11th day of May. I'm going to start a group at 2345 Stillman Road, and it's going to be for alcoholics only and their wives, and non-alcoholics aren't allowed to come at all. No Oxford Group members there was. Oh, they threw a fit. He said they almost had a big fist fight the next time a bunch of came up from Akron. They're going to tear the place up. All in the name of God, you know. Nothing happened, but yet it got started. There were 13 of them to begin with. How that got started is this. Go back to Akron City Hospital. This guy here, Abby Goldrick, was a lawyer. Smart guy, big shot. And lawyers don't run around with used cars, sales carsmen. They don't run with those kind of people at all. He didn't like old Clarence. But Clarence got him put in the hospital down there anyway, to his wife. And so goes the story. Clarence goes to 234. While he's in the hospital down in Akron, Clarence goes over to his wife and sneaks around and gets his wife to allow him to have a meeting in his house. So he gets out, unbeknownst to him, they start having an AA meeting right in his house. And they had 13 people. And it grew, and they fought and everything else like people do, but it stayed. Then they had more and more and more. It grew so big that they had to have Borden was a millionaire guy, they used his house in near proximity, or also on a Thursday night. I think they had a big argument, really. I think they kicked Clarence out. Clarence said, I got kicked out of the meeting I started. I think that's what happened. But he started another meeting. And then the orchard group started, and another meeting. They started growing. Now, what were they doing different? They had a spirit. He would take, the newcomer get a big book in one hand and a Bible in another hand. That's the way it was back in those days, like it or not. That's the way they did. And they were very, very serious. And I read to you already how Dr. Bob took people through the steps. They had this list of things, you would list your character defects like that, and then you went on, it's all over with. Clarence did the same thing. He got one person that people started coming in. I told you about the plain dealers started, the Cleveland plain dealers started sending articles out about how wonderful AA was. Raleigh Hemphill did this happened, all kind of different things happened, and it was growing by leaps and bounds. And before long, little Cleveland, Ohio, had 4 times as many people as New York and Akron put together because of what he was doing. They did things fast. And people poured in. They didn't know what to do with these people pouring in. People with 3 weeks sobriety were helping other people with the steps. They got it so simple. This is a very simple program. And it worked. It grew. The excitement was there. And I'd like to read something to you about those days. My gosh, this is a wonderful book here, Dr. Bob and a Good Old Timer. Page 200, you start off in here, and you read Sudden Growth in Cleveland. It's too much to read here, but I want to read just one page at page 261 that tells us something here about some things up a little bit here about what was going on there. Okay. This ends at what I told you. I got all these people sober, and everything's wonderful. This is why they had the first AA convention in Cleveland, because they'd grown so fast. You'd think it'd have it in New York, but it's in Cleveland because of this. But he says this: meetings in Cleveland have evolved somewhat differently from those in Akron. We opened with an audible prayer, said Clarence Snyder. The speaker, who was chosen 4 weeks in advance, spoke for 45 minutes, then we closed with the Lord's Prayer. See, that started way, way back, Lord's Prayer. Then we would reopen for informal comments, questions, and so forth. The total meeting might go on anywhere from 1.5 to 2 hours. No smoking was allowed in the first part of the meeting, only in the informal part. That's the trouble, Clarence said. They take it so casually today. I think a little discipline is necessary. I think AA was more effective in those days. Records of Cleveland show that 93% of us who came never had a drink again. I'll read this again. Records in Cleveland show that 93% of those who came to it never had a drink again. Wow. When I discovered that people had slips in AA, it really shook me up. Today it's also watered down so much, anyone can wander in now. But you see, as I told you, you didn't just wander into AA then, right or wrong, but you had to show that you were serious or you ain't going to get in. And that's probably why they had such a wonderful high thing. You know, the Big Book tells on page XX, it says the ones who really tried 50% got sober once and remained that way. Well, really tried means, didn't mean just wandered in. You show me where I'm an alcoholic or not. You know, I see this all the time today. You know, I know that when Indianapolis, I wrote the history of Indianapolis. This guy Doherty Sheeran was visited by this guy who came out of Cleveland to get tasted. He'd been sober for 2 years, and he said, "I understand you're an alcoholic." And Doherty Sheeran said, "Well, maybe I am, and maybe I'm not." Doherty Sheeran, rich guy. He said, "Either you are or you're not, whichever." The conversation's over, you know, and went on. But that's the way they were. I'm not saying that's what we ought to be doing now, but I'm just saying what they did now. This is not good. It's not what it ought to be, but what did happen. And so Clarence was a great dude and started things all over. And then things started happening all around. Raleigh Hemsley, around that time I told you about already, bragged about being in AA. Now, there are no traditions back then. Traditions are not going to be written until 1946. This is 41, 42. They're not going to be accepted by AA until 1950, many years in the future. But, so there's no tradition holding me back. And so he's going around telling all these people, and people born in AA because of Raleigh Hemsley, and see, it really works. Well, Bill Wilson started, so he started doing the same thing. He got his picture to papers and everything, and gave talks all over and so on. He finally saw it wasn't the right thing to do, but yet this is part of our AA history. A lot of people don't know that. But, Bill, and then one thing I want to talk about too. Time's getting short, and Sister Ignatia started. This is Sister Ignatia. She could. There's a picture there. But she was a Dr. Bob's nurse, and a nurse that worked with Dr. Bob with patients, and they were allowing people to sneak into the St. Thomas Hospital. If you go to Akron, that's one of the stops you make on it. You visit tourist stops, you go there. It's a wonderful thing to see, and a lot of great pictures there. And I was just there recently, and Sister Ignatia took over the alcoholic ward. They started off, they'd sneak alcoholics, they'd call it gastritis, and if he's drunk, she'd put him in a room, there's a flower room they had. And that flower room, sometimes they had corporate, I think, or something like that. But anyway, they had this flower room, they put a drunk in there, and the flowers and the drunk smell would all float together. I thought that'd be quite an aroma. So I read. And but they had a 5-day program finally, and the drunk would come in, get detoxed a little bit more. And that third day, they do the third step prayer. The fourth day, they do an inventory of themselves and stuff like that. The fifth day, they're ready to get out, and they're supposed to help the next person get sober. Some of our drunk comes in, they help dress him and everything else, put him in bed and everything. That's the way they did back in those days. And if you got drunk, well, you're not supposed to ever come back again. But she did let some people come back. But if you came back again, like I told you, you were not allowed to mingle with the patients. They give you a special room because you'll pollute them. That's where they felt, right or wrong. We talk about our chips of the day, our chips. This is what she gave out, a little medallion, Catholic medallion. And, that was the beginning before we had chips that we have now. This is the beginning of that whole idea. I think it's kind of interesting. And that was that part. History went on. We got more and more people sober in all the different places in Indianapolis. And this picture of Jimmy Burwell. This is what I wanted to show you. I knew I had it somewhere. This is what might have been our cover. The Campbell guy had that. So they decided against it. I like the circus cover better. And this is some of Jimmy Burwell. A lot of pictures of Jimmy Burwell you probably haven't seen. And he's the guy responsible for God as we understand him, if you can say that. So, as I say, he grew all over the place, and the magazines had a lot to do with him. This Liberty magazine, I'm going to talk about the history of Indianapolis, Indiana for a while. This here came out in, actually it was September of '39, and Doherty Sharon over in Indianapolis read this, and he wrote to Liberty magazine, and they told him how to get a hold of the central office in Ruth Hawk of New York, and started corresponding with them, and eventually Clarence Snyder was head of all the 12-step work on this side of Cleveland, on west of Cleveland. West. Yeah, west of Cleveland. And so he sent this guy funny story about this here. No, I guess it's not in this book. Anyway, I can't think of the guy's name. But he's a little, very short, fat guy. Couldn't stay sober for nothing. And but he's a good 12-stepper. And Clarence sent him to see Doherty Sharon. And I told you the story about Are You an Alcoholic? He started there, and so this started AA in Indianapolis. This little guy here, he'd go to Atlanta and all around little places. He's a Venetian blind salesman. To show anybody can carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he finally did get sober in California years later. But yet, the fact that somebody's been sober a short time doesn't mean they can't carry the message. That's what I get. You think, well, you got drunk. last year you're not even know. It's always carry this wonderful message, exciting thing. And I could go on talking, but I think probably somebody said you said enough. And but I'm thrilled to be here, and I thank you for allowing me to carry the message. This is my way of carrying the message. In our history lies our hope. Don't forget that. And so when you go to meetings, try to talk a little bit about the history when you get to something, history of some particular step or something going on. And get into some real authentic AA history. And these wonderful books to read. The more you read, the more you'll find you need to read. And it's really exciting. And so I got your addresses here, and hope I can email some of you back and forth. And so let me know. And so God bless, and thank you for allowing me to be here. And I'm done.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.